When it comes to any accident, it is always best to give way to the emergency services or first responders and the cops. Everyone should give them enough space and room to do their jobs. That is practically common sense. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like and share this video with your friends. But what happens if those first responders are in conflict with each other? What would happen to the victims then? This is the case when an EMT and a cop started an argument in the middle of a rescue operation. The car crash took place on a narrow road. With 5 police cars and an ambulance on the scene, plus all the traffic trying to get past, it was a very tight space to work in. Everybody was running back and forth trying to do their jobs. Troy was one of the 2 EMTs who responded to the incident. The first one was trying to stabilize a victim in the incident, while the other one was trying to figure out a way for the ambulance to move out from the crash scene. The problem was that the ambulance was blocked in by the police cars, and now that one of the injured was on the stretcher, Troy ran up to the police sergeant and asked if he could ask the cops to move their cruisers so that the ambulance can go through. But the sergeant was not in the best of moods. He had looked at the EMT as if he could not believe he had the nerve to order him around. But he then muttered to the other cops to move their cars. The cops either did not hear him or ignored him on purpose. Troy was surprised by how the cops are behaving. Why would they refuse to move their cars and block an ambulance? The sergeant went to his cruiser, but it was locked. It seemed like the cops had no respect for their sergeant at all. Troy could see that his partner and the injured were already inside the ambulance. It was time for them to leave. "We really need to get out now." He was starting to feel impatient. He also could feel his temper rising. As an EMT, Troy was trained to stay calm even in the worst situations, but this was a situation he was not ready for. The cops were supposed to help them with their job and not hinder them. Then, Troy noticed that there was a tow truck also in the traffic. Troy could see the driver of the truck was waiting and drinking some water in the cab. Troy wondered if the man would consider helping him. Troy told the sergeant his plan. Together, they went up to the tow truck and asked if he could help them move the cruisers off the road. After hearing them out, the tow truck driver said that he could help. Troy rushed back to the ambulance to give his partner an update. His partner said this was something he had to see and came out to watch. They watched as the tow truck driver hooked his cable over the cruiser and then turned the lever in his cab. There was a loud noise as the cruiser's front wheels started to lift off from the tarmac. It was very hard to ignore. The cop in charge of the cruiser rushed to the tow truck immediately. As the truck driver towed the car to the side of the road, the cop in charge of the cruiser rushed to the cab right away. The cop's face was red in anger, and he demanded that the tow truck driver. The tow truck driver, who has full control of the situation now, just stared at the cop. He calmly told the cop, "My drop rate is $100. The cop could not believe it. He immediately turned to his sergeant for help. The sergeant just looked at him and said, "It is legal to move any vehicles that block emergency services." He reminded the cop that he had asked them to move their cars earlier, but they did not follow. The cop realized he was in over his head when he did not follow his sergeant's orders. He tried to negotiate for his cop car. "I'll give you 40. That's it." But the tow truck driver shook his head. "No. The drop fee is $100. It will cost more if I pull it away." The cop knew he could not risk having the cruiser towed away, so he let out a defeated sigh and paid the truck driver. The tow truck driver let the tires hit the ground and took off the hook. The cop immediately went into his car and left the scene in anger. The sergeant finally relaxed and let out a laugh. "Serves him right." The rest of the cops who had witnessed everything immediately moved their cruisers out of the way. Troy and his partner immediately made their way to the ambulance to do their jobs. It turns out that the cop from earlier had only been on the job for a couple of weeks. He had an inflated sense of ego and a cocky attitude. This one happened to be one of the worst, who bullied everyone and acted like he ran the place. The funny thing is that the law they used to tow the cruiser away did not exist at all, so basically the arrogant cop did not really have to spend $100. But as far as the sergeant was concerned, it was a lesson that is long overdue. Troy was able to drive the ambulance away from the crash scene at last. He was able to arrive at the hospital, and the injured people got the care they needed right on time. He was glad he had the sergeant at his side during that time. Troy was so amused by the whole situation that he shared the story on Reddit with the title "Petty Revenge," and his post was a hit. People loved how the obnoxious cop was taken down a peg. In fact, most of them started to share their own stories. Someone also shared his experience as an EMT for the fire department. He said he responded to a car accident once and got in trouble with a rookie cop. The cop did not like where the ambulance and the fire truck were parked on the scene. They moved the ambulance and the fire truck. But in doing so, the ambulance ended up 150 to 200 feet away from the crash scene. This meant every extra piece of equipment they might need to treat the injured would take a few minutes to retrieve. After watching how everybody had to run back and forth, the fire department chief could not believe how much time they were wasting just because of the cop's interference. The 55-year-old fire department chief ended up in a fist fight with the cop. This all made a very interesting and chaotic scene. The police chief arrived later to intervene, and thankfully they were able to work things out, and the police department bought the fire department dinner that night. Another Reddit user also shared his experience as a volunteer firefighter. He was also involved in an incident where the firefighters and cops were in conflict. He was operating the second engine when they were dispatched to a car accident on a nearby interstate. There were 3 vehicles involved in the accident, and these vehicles blocked the left shoulder of 4 main lanes. To protect the victims and his crew, he placed the engine truck in a way that blocked the 2 left lanes. They were not even done attending to all the injured when a trooper approached him and demanded that they reposition the engine truck so that a 3rd lane of traffic would open up. He explained that the truck was parked that way for space and protection. He walked away to attend to another victim when the trooper came back a few minutes later with the same demands. The Reddit user pointed out that there was equipment spread out on the lanes and they needed the space to treat the victims. The trooper looked like he has had enough and went to one of the crew and asked them who was the ranking officer on the scene. When the 2 firefighters pointed at the same man he had been raising his voice to, the look on the trooper's face was priceless. Later, a rescue chief arrived. He and the trooper had a conversation, but what the trooper did not know was that the rescue chief and the Reddit user are good friends. The trooper ended up leaving him and his team alone until they were done with their jobs. Ambulances always have right-of-way since they are saving lives, but you would be surprised how many citizens fail to acknowledge this. A rescue unit was responding to an emergency in a small neighborhood and their ambulance happened to block a driveway. But instead of understanding that a life-threatening emergency is going on, the owner of the driveway left a very rude note. The note says, "You may be saving lives, but don't park your van in a stupid place and block my drive." The emergency team involved in the incident was incredibly disappointed when they discovered the note after bringing the patient to the hospital. They even posted about it in their Twitter account. This made the public aware of how many threatening notes like this one that EMS crews all over the country get. The West Midlands Ambulance Service also revealed that they get an average of at least 1 incident of abuse against their crew per day. Paramedic and ambulance operations manager Lee Brentnall pleads to the public, if you genuinely need to leave your house urgently and we are blocking your access, please come and knock on the door where the emergency is taking place. Sometimes we will be able to move the vehicle, for example, if we are treating a patient, but they do not need both of us there at the time. However, there will be times when we are treating someone experiencing a life-threatening and time-critical emergency, and moving our ambulance will not be our priority. You will need to be patient as we try to save someone's life.